There is nothing wrong with hate. So that's the title that I gave to this video. A provocative title, obviously, and something I've been struggling with to put into words for about 2 years now. So I've been on this journey of believing and trying to live into, as best as I can, into the belief or the story that there is nothing wrong with me or with any of us. There's nothing wrong with any of my parts, and there's nothing wrong with any of your parts. And in order to do that, I had to face some things within myself that I was very much not okay with. Anger was a really big one. I was raised in a context where anger was not very welcome, and I associated anger very strongly with violence and abuse. So for me to reclaim my own anger and acknowledge that that is a part of me, and that there's nothing wrong with the emotion of anger. There can be something really harmful about actions carried out when that emotion takes control and overrules all of the other parts of myself, my rational self, my compassionate self, my intuitive self, so that I'm only acting from anger. Obviously that can cause a lot of harm, but I had to recognize that as an emotion, anger was actually incredibly useful and really necessary to be an integrated, whole, healthy human being. So after being on this journey of welcoming every part of myself, the one that really tripped me up was hate. It's like, okay, I can welcome anger, I can welcome despair, I can welcome sadness, even depression. I found a place and a reason for welcoming depression. But when it came to hate, I was stumped. Like, how can I welcome hate? How can hate be anything other than a terrible thing that needs to be overcome? So I first asked myself that question while I was going through a divorce, and I just kept having this entanglement with my former spouse. And in the legal divorce proceedings, I found myself constantly wanting to appease, go into a fawn trauma response, and then not stick to my own agreements and boundaries, or agreements that I had made with my lawyer, and then just say, yeah, sure, you can have everything, you know, or yeah, just I found myself wanting to have compassion for my ex, and then just compromise in ways that, like, I knew were just not right for me. This is not the right thing to do, but it felt incredibly difficult to stick to my own agreements and boundaries. And so it was in that context that I just kind of heard an inner voice that said, you need to hate them. I was like, no, that's not happening. That's not happening. I'm not a hateful person. I'm not going to hate them. You know, I understand why they're acting the way they are acting, and even the really cruel things that they're saying, like, understand how that comes from, you know, their trauma, and I understand that they're projecting this and that on me, and so therefore they're just acting in what they think is self-defense, even though I'm not actually doing the things that they think I'm doing, you know. And so having this whole understanding of my former partner's inner world and how it was their own pain and their own drama, well, it was drama, but trauma was their own trauma and wounding that was driving their projections, and the cruelty that they showed me at times. That empathy made it incredibly difficult for me to have my own boundaries and for me to advocate for myself in this divorce process. So then I heard this voice, like, you need to hate them. And I struggled a lot with that voice, and then finally gave myself permission. And I said to my best friend, okay, I'm going to go hate them now. And my best friend was really uncomfortable with that as well. It was like, okay, well, good luck. And I said, yeah, but I'm going in consciously. I'm going to really pay attention. And, you can help me when I get stuck, right? If I get lost in it, and you're not going to let me do anything horrible and cruel, right? You're here. You're keeping an eye out, and you've got my back, right? He was like, I guess. So I said, okay, here we go then. And I just gave myself permission to hate. I would ritualize it sometimes. I'd set up a pillow and projected my former spouse onto the pillow, and then went to town and just told the pillow how much I hate them. I hate everything about them. I hate how they're treating me in the divorce. I hate how they treated me in the marriage. I hate how, oh gosh, I went even into really ridiculous things. I hate their hair color, or the way they snore, or like their favorite foods, or I just let it all come out, and I just allowed myself, allowed the hate to pour out of me. And it felt ugly. I mean, I could just feel this contraction in my chest. Like, I felt really tight in my chest, and nauseous. Like, it just made me want to throw up. It was a really ugly feeling. But I noticed that as I moved through all this hate and I let it flow, and sometimes I let it be witnessed too. Like, I said it in front of another person, and they understood that I was doing this whole experiment with hate and allowed it to happen. And I found that as I was able to express all of that hate, something shifted for me. I started to get in touch with parts of myself that were hurting. And some of that empathy that kept going to my ex, and kept making excuses for, their like really hurtful and cruel behaviors, and that kept undermining my self-advocacy, that empathy kind of came back to me, and I started to empathize with my own experience more, and I started to notice some of the ways in which I had been impacted by my partner, or my spouse, that I hadn't even recognized. So it opened up all of these layers of stored trauma and pain inside of myself that I was then able to move through and release. So I found myself mourning for myself. I found myself grieving for parts of myself. And in doing so, I felt myself become more whole. And ironically, as I became more whole, as I started to have this empathy for these parts of myself, I found that the hate naturally decreased. So there wasn't anything that I did to try to make it go away or transform it in any way, but the intensity of it just started to go down. And as it went down, I found that that empathy I had for myself expanded into empathy for my spouse with boundaries. So I then found that I could hold both my own experience fully, but also hold that, they're not an evil person, but I am going to hold my boundaries, and I can simultaneously recognize their humanity and their wounding, and the reasons why to them it doesn't seem cruel what they're doing, and why in their mind they're just doing self-defense. And I could hold that at the same time as also holding my own boundaries and staying with my own commitments and advocating for what I needed. So that's how my relationship to hate changed, and then from there I started thinking about how we are treating hate in our culture, which reminded me a lot of how we treat anger. When I was younger, I thought for me, anger and violence was or harm was intrinsically linked. So I believed that if I allowed myself anger, I would also become a person that causes harm and that becomes violent and dangerous to others. And eventually I realized that it was actually not allowing myself anger that was causing me to become dangerous. It was actually these outbursts of suppressed anger that would result in unnecessary conflicts and me just kind of blowing up at someone seemingly out of the blue, because I had been suppressing my anger against them for such a long time that it just kind of came out sideways, sometimes as passive aggression, sometimes as manipulation, or sometimes as an outburst. And so I eventually learned that welcoming my anger and working with it and recognizing that there's nothing wrong with that emotion of anger actually prevented it from turning into rage and prevented it from coming out in uncontrolled, harmful, sideways explosions. And so I came to understand that hate is actually a similar emotion. It's a similar energy. We all know what happens when hate takes over. And it is such a horrific thing that we think that we need to suppress hate altogether in order to prevent these horrific things at the far end of the spectrum of hate to take place, when in reality it's our constant suppression of the urge to hate and create distance to another person, so that way we can take back some of that empathy we need for ourselves. It's actually that suppression that eventually causes hate to come out sideways. So it's become a really important practice to me to work with my own hate, to recognize it and to welcome it, and to destigmatize the emotion. So that's not to justify any of the atrocities or acts of violence or of cruelty, of inhumane behaviors that are committed when that emotion takes over or when it comes out sideways, but it's to destigmatize the emotion itself and to make space for that emotion to to exist and to help us create distance from another person when we are over empathizing with that person to the point of losing self-empathy. So when it's time to take some of that empathy back to ourselves, so that way we can engage in a more authentic, boundaried way, that is an energy we actually need. So there's nothing wrong with hate. There's nothing wrong with the emotion of hating and wanting that additional space from another person. It's really terrifying, it is really scaring, and it is very unsupported in our culture to allow the emotion of hate to be expressed, to hold space for it in another person, to ask somebody to hold space for it, to ritually express it. It's just an emotion that we're told not to have. But I'm here to say I welcome hate, my own and other people's, and I believe that in this time where we are seeing hate coming out sideways in so many different ways, and we're just seeing people hating each other left and right, this is the perfect time to change our relationship to hate and to stop suppressing it, to stop dismissing and demonizing the emotion itself, and to start tapping into it and learn from it and welcome it and recognize there's nothing wrong with it. It is looking to protect us. It's an emotion we need, so let's work with it.